Hello. Good morning, children. How are you doing? I hope you're fine, right? And how is this COVID-19 holiday? I believe you are enjoying it, right? Yeah, just tell me yes. Yes, yes, you are. Though sometimes it can be boring, but we just have to stay at home and stay safe. Do you get it now?
And as you are told, learning continues. And that's why I'm here this morning to take you creative writing. You know, Mrs. Martha takes you creative writing. And the topic we're looking at is fantasy. Looking at fantasy stories. I'm sure you know what fantasy is. Do you? Okay, when talking about a fantasy has to do with what you imagine that is unlikely to happen. Do you get it? Let me show you.
For example, a fantasy story often takes place in a setting that has supernatural elements. The setting may include things like magic or imaginary creatures, and maybe that setting is something that's completely made up. But even though there are unrealistic pieces to the story, the characters in the story behave in realistic ways. They tend to act like humans in real life. And even though there are these supernatural elements, there's often a lesson in the story that applies to real life. Oftentimes, these fantasy stories use a good versus evil theme. We might see the same theme repeated over and over in fantasy stories, although these different stories will approach the theme in different ways. Let's look at a few examples of fantasy stories. The Wizard of Oz has fantasy elements. Although Dorothy is a realistic character, she encounters fantastic or supernatural creatures as well. There are witches, there's a talking scarecrow.
Welcome back. From that video, you've learned what a fantasy story is. You've learned that a fantasy story is a story that is from the writer's imagination. A story that is not real. Do you get it now? A story that is set in an imaginary world. As something that you just think of. It's not real to real life. They are just make-believe story. Though in fantasy stories, we can have some elements there that are real, yes. But we have some characters in fantasy stories that make us to believe that, oh, this thing cannot happen in real life. And so we call those stories fantasy stories. Do you get it now? Now take, for example, the story of Cinderella story. Cinderella story has a fairy godmother, right? And the fairy godmother dressed her up for the party. In real life, you cannot just be in your house thinking of how you get to somewhere, and you just see someone will just come into your house and dress you up. Is it possible? Have you experienced it before? And even if it happens, you know how you will feel. You feel like running away, right? But in that story, Cinderella just took it like that and she just enjoyed the moment. Do you get it now? So, and again, the story of the shoemaker, the herbs and the shoemaker. The herbs and the shoemaker is a story that is not real. It cannot happen in real life. You can imagine. We've read that story together. A shoemaker a poor shoemaker, he didn't have money, and he would just buy leather. And before the daybreak, the two herbs will have come to help him to make shoes, and he will be wondering what had happened. Who did this? It cannot happen in real life. If you buy your leather, you refuse to make it the next day. That's how you will meet it there. Do you get that? But in this story, we are made to believe that there are some people or some forces that can help you to do your work, even when you are asleep. But that cannot happen in real life because the lazy man, there is no food for a lazy man. Do you get it now? Yes. So there are some elements of fantasy that you must take note of. A fantasy story usually have magical creatures. Magical creatures. Yes, full of magic. Full of magic. It involves magic, it involves adventure. Adventure means to travel from one place to another. Do you get it? An adventure does indeed take us to places that seem remote from daily life, full of joy and new discoveries. Do you get it now? And it involves fantasy, things that are not real in real life. Do you get it now? So let me take you to this video and tell me which is real and which one is not real.
It's Tina's world. Hello, I'm Tina. I like telling stories about things that are make-believe. But I also like telling stories about things that aren't make-believe, things that are real. Things that are make-believe couldn't ever happen. Things that are real could. For instance, when I tell stories where I'm a flying princess, those stories are make-believe. They couldn't ever really happen. But when I tell stories about going to the store, or what I did at school, those stories are real. Here's another story. I was flying around on my pet dragon when a huge vacuum cleaner started flying after me. So I made myself invisible, and the vacuum cleaner flew right by me. Do you think that story is real? Or is it make-believe? Make-believe. Right! Pet dragons are not real. And I can't really make myself invisible. That story was make-believe. Let's pick a treat for Pepper. Here's another story. I was at the store with my mother when I saw some strawberries. My mom was going to buy them, but they cost too much. So we bought some bananas instead. Do you think that story is real? Or is it make-believe? Real. Right! Things like that happen all the time. It's real. Let's pick a treat for Pepper. Here's another story. I was playing soccer with my friends, and it started to rain. So we all got very wet and muddy, and had to stop playing. Do you think that story is real? Or is it make-believe? Real. Right! Things like that happen all the time. It's real. Let's pick a treat for Pepper. Here's another story. I opened the door to my closet, and there was a forest in there. So I peeked through the trees, and I saw a whole city made of green cheese. All in my closet. Do you think that story is real? Or is it make-believe? Make-believe. Right! Cities made of green cheese are not real. And there can't really be a forest in your closet. That story was make-believe. I like telling you my stories. Stop by again sometime and I'll tell you some more. Maybe next time you can tell me some of your stories. Bye! Tina's World.